Now, let's consider about risk evaluation. Risk evaluation is conducted in order to determine the relative seriousness of hazard risk for the country or the community. To determine the risk and the prioritization of the treatment may be done by creating a risk matrix, comparing hazard risk against levels of risk estimated during the analysis with a previously established risk evaluation criteria, evaluating risk according to the SMOG methodology, which is nothing but seriousness, manageability, acceptability, urgency, growth. That is a methodology that used to evaluate the risk using those parameters. The final output of risk evaluation should be a prioritized list of risks to be used to decide the mitigation options. Now, there are a number of modeling techniques are available both for the risk analysis and for the vulnerability analysis. And let me give an example about a computer modeling technique available to estimate the injuries and death that occur during a disaster. HASUS and HASUS MH is a nationally standardized GIS based risk assessment and loss estimation tool which was developed by Federal Emergency Management Agency FEMA and increase the accuracy of injury and death estimations. The model estimates the number of injuries and fatalities that would result from earthquakes of varying magnitudes, and it is being updated to include other hazards such as floods and winds. For the disaster risk assessment, United Nations uses a comprehensive risk assessment methodology having the following steps. The first way is to understand the current situation and needs and the gaps. And second important aspect is the hazard assessment, then the exposure assessment, vulnerability analysis, loss or impact analysis, risk profiling and evaluation, formulation or revision of disaster risk reduction strategies and action plans. Risk assessments used to the formulation and revision of disaster risk reduction strategies, climate change adaptation and mitigation, urban development planning, humanitarian planning, and the establishment of early warning systems. And risk assessment are also used as a basis for the design, funding, and implementation of disaster risk reduction or risk management projects for the communities. At present, all international agencies and countries have come together to get a risk-informed sustainable development. All these has happened over few decades ago with lot of collective effort from the side of many countries dealing to a systematic change in disaster management approaches over the period of time. At present, it is looking into a new framework which is called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is looking for sustainable development goals in development, which also includes notable reduction in the disasters or disaster related fatalities or losses by 2030. It has also a climate change agreement named as the Paris Agreement, then New Urban Agenda, systematic or systemic risk and system-based approaches, all looking to risk reduction, rather risk-informed sustainable development. So to conclude, risk and vulnerability reduction are very important to reduce injuries, death and damages associated with the disasters. All the nations may significantly reduce their risks and vulnerability. It doesn't matter whether they are wealthy or having numerous facilities. Yet, most nations, the disaster management emphasis still focused only upon the post-disaster functions of response and recovery rather than pre-disaster mitigation and preparedness, which is more meaningful and effective. So as I've mentioned, now the countries have come together to accept or adopt methodologies that looks for disaster risk reduction, whereby reducing the loss or risk and vulnerability. Let me now give you a case study about the impact of cyclone preparedness measures in Odisha. There were a supercyclone that has happened in Paradip in 28th to 30th October 1999, and another cyclone, that is Cyclone Fallin, in 12th October 2013. So in this case, I want to highlight the impact of cyclone preparedness and its benefits in reducing the disaster risk and casualties. During 1999, there were just 23 cyclone shelters existed in Orissa, whereas Orissa State Disaster Management Authority has reported that they had constructed 43 cyclone shelters by July 2003 and 500,000 cyclone resistant houses, then 10,000 primary schools and 900 secondary schools strengthened to meet with a cyclone. By 2013, an estimated 200 shelters were completed, each able to hold about 500 people. And the OSDMA also trained NGOs to understand risk and warnings and how to use shelters or when to use the shelters and what are the other preparations they should take during a cyclone event. In terms of preparedness and early warning, it was reported that in 1999, Indian Meteorological Department had given first official advisory about 48 hours before the landfall of the cyclone. During that period, most people hear of warning between 24 and 12 hours beforehand through TV, newspaper or the radio, other communication devices. And IMD underestimated the cyclone's intensity and only a revised warning 2 hours before communications were cut, which was insufficient in time to respond for such a huge magnitude event. During 2013, IMD issued a red message on 8th October, that is about 96 hours before the landfall, and they had given an improved detailed guidance for preparedness about 72 hours before the landfall. The early warning messages disseminated on TV, online media, and 10,000 text messages were sent to the mobile phones. The people have also used loudspeakers and to reach out areas without access to TV or internet. So what has happened? How people responded? In terms of 1999 cyclone, most people did not evacuate, and it was found that the supplies were inadequate for the number of people that was affected by the cyclone, and people did not go into the shelters. Whereas in 2013, communities took active steps to protect themselves, and they have moved into cyclone shelters and with the provisions and livestock, which means that about 1.2 million people took refuge and were moved inland. So there were control rooms established in 10 coastal districts. Water levels in reservoirs were lowered to mitigate flooding, and all the precautions were taken to protect the livestock. Whereas if you think about the coordination aspect of 1999 cyclone, there was no mechanism of coordinating response and communications. Whereas in 2013, Cyclone Falin, National Disaster Management Authority deployed 2,000 personnel to the 3 affected states ahead of the landfall. That is, about 29 teams of NDRF were deployed with rescue equipment in Odisha and 15 in Andhra Pradesh, assisted by 4 teams from Tamil Nadu. So all the teams were equipped with satellite phones and wireless sets. Now let's consider the differences in effects of supercyclone and cyclone Falin. The cyclone statistics shows that wind speed of supercyclone was up to 260 km per hour, and for cyclone Falin it was up to 220 km per hour. And if you see, the affected people were 19 million in terms of supercyclone and 13.2 million in case of cyclone Falin. There were about 69,000 people were evacuated during supercyclone in 1999, and 1 million people were evacuated in 2013 associated with cyclone Falin. So if you look into the casualties, approximately 10,000 people were died during 1999 because of the supercyclone, whereas the fatality was reduced to 30 to 50 because of the massive preparedness that was taken prior to the disaster. And if you see the livestock lost, about 450,000 livestock were killed, 1.6 million houses were damaged, 1.9 million hectares agricultural loss in 1999, about 5,000 kilometers square land flooded. The loss was estimated about $320 million. So I wanted to show you here that the preparedness before the disaster that helped to reduce the loss in terms of human life and livestock. Also direct and indirect loss due to agriculture and revenue loss. This may be considered as a good example for the reduction of losses or minimizing the losses due to disaster preparedness. So with this we conclude. I hope you understood the concept of risk, vulnerability, how to reduce the risk, how to reduce the vulnerability, and the factors that affecting the vulnerability, and detailed analysis of risk and vulnerability and uses of this concept in the sustainable development or risk informed sustainable development. Thank you.